Tracy Martin.
Kia ora, Mr Speaker. I rise to speak on the Budget Policy Statement 2015 on behalf of New Zealand First, and there has been some interesting comments made around what is in this budget and what is not in this budget. There were earlier in the contribution by Mr Bennett, there was a comment made around a statement attributed to New Zealand First and to the Right Honourable Winston Peters around spending on a particular road of national significance. And I'd like to remind people that there are 7 roads of national significance, not just one, 7 roads of national significance to which the Right Honourable Winston Peters was addressing his statements. And now I would like to move on to the one road of national significance that is a great deal of importance, and the one road of national significance mentioned by Mr Bennett, and that would be the Puhoi to Wellsford road of national significance. I would like to direct Mr Bennett to my maiden speech on the 8th of February 2012 and the advocacy I gave there to remind the National Party MP for Rodney of his commitment to advocate for the continuation of that project, but not just that project, sir, inside any budget then or now, but for the retention of access at Puhoi, upon which he has remained silent, and that the people of Puhoi had to fight themselves with Auckland Transport and with NZTA to make sure that they would be able to still get to their homes off the end of the Northern Gateway. I would direct Mr Bennett to my social media page once I get to leave this House after the series of debates we are going to have, where I will put up there the number of speeches that I have made in this House taking to task any member of this House that calls that road a holiday highway. I live in that area. I know the importance of that area and this road to it, and so does New Zealand First. New Zealand First is highly aware that Warkworth, under previous budgets and budgets now, is going to be a satellite town of Auckland. In the next 20 years, it's expected to go from 10,000 dwellings to 30,000 dwellings. And the infrastructure that is required there to cater for that as a satellite town of Auckland. We also know, however, and the reason why the review is mentioned is, not only were there 7 roads of national significance, and the other thing that is interesting, that is not mentioned inside any of these budget documents, is the fact that the people of Puhoi and Warkworth and Snells Beach and Algies Bay and Kaipara, they pay a toll on the current Northern Gateway motorway. They will pay a toll under the projected project of the Puhoi to Wellsford. And yet at the same time, Mr Jamie Lee Ross stands up under this budget debate and says he will advocate and ask his government to block Auckland Transport and the ability of Auckland Transport to make its own decisions around its own spending for all the areas of Auckland, of which Warkworth is one, of which Puhoi is one, of which Wellsford and Tahana are some. And yet he will block them to bring back that investment under any budget, bring back that investment and centre it on the city. And therein lies the interesting thing, Mr Speaker. I would direct anybody who would like to see the truth of statements made by New Zealand First to page 97 of our manifesto, where we guarantee the farmers who are in Auckland, we guarantee the farmers who are in Northland, we guarantee the farmers throughout the whole of New Zealand that unlike the budget cuts that have been made to road subsidies or the reallocation of budgets that have been made to road subsidies for rural areas, we will make sure every rural member, every farmer, every producer inside those rural areas can get their produce to an appropriate form of transport on a road that has been well maintained. Page 97, been there since prior to 2014. So I would direct Mr Bennett, if he'd like to actually educate himself, instead of taking a researcher's note and then deciding he knows what he's talking about, to go and read the document. So that's the first thing, sir. I'd also like to talk about some of the other areas of this. I mean, it's very interesting inside the budgetary policy statement report here. So there is to be a reduction in spending from budget 2015 by $500 million. I think it's interesting with the announcement of $68 million worth of spending around transport. Where will there be cuts for this $500 million saving? Where will that come from? Will it be another situation where Hill Street was placed on the back burner because no member of the national government has the decency to go up there and actually sit down and talk to the people of Warkworth who have been advocating for that intersection to be amended year upon year upon year for decades? Colin Greenslade, I acknowledge you. Is that where these cuts are going to come from, sir? Is the Hill Street intersection once again going to be delayed because this government has promised $68 million on bridges, 8 of which nobody actually identified prior to last week? Is that what's going to affect the people of Northland? Is that what's going to affect the people of Wellsford and Tahana who sit in the Northland electorate? There were some other interesting comments about the committee heard that special housing areas are picking up speed and developers are getting the message that they need to act soon and start building houses. Interesting statement, interesting statement. And of course it's the silver bullet for housing affordability, apparently. Although the phrasing has changed now, it's no longer affordable housing. It's being referred to by the minister inside this document as low-value housing. What does that change? Where has that change come from? It's supposed to be affordable, but now it's become low value. It starts to infer a lesser quality of house. And is that what we're aiming for? That it starts to infer these things. Is that what we're aiming for? So we found that a very interesting comment inside the report. One of the things that we'd be interested to know, if it was recorded here at all, and the questioning to the minister didn't uncover it, land banking. We're aware of land banking taking place. The special housing accord areas for Auckland have been clearly identified. First, second and third tranche actually have been identified and commented on. And what we know is that there is land banking going on in some of those areas. So while that unitary plan has not been secured, large tracts of that land are being bought up and set aside. We would like to know what the government intends to do about that and would make some suggestion and that they have some conversation about penalties if after a certain period of time these special housing accord areas are not built on. Because once the city becomes to its maximum yet again, housing prices will continue to rise. There was a couple of other interesting pieces in here. The conversation around foreign investment that is actually recorded inside the statement. So it was suggested by the opposition members of the Select Committee, and it's recorded here inside this document, that there be a cross-party audit of foreign investment in New Zealand. Over the decade, so it says some on the committee proposed a cross-party audit of foreign investment in New Zealand over the decade that the Overseas Investment Act came into force. Now the minister didn't think it was necessary. Not necessary, don't care, don't worry, never mind, which is what we're hearing about foreign investment and foreign ownership from this government. And our question would be why the minister why the minister doesn't feel that it's necessary. There was an offer here for a cross-party audit if there's no concern about what the Overseas Investment Office is doing, if there's no concern about how that act is actually being applied, then there's no harm to do a review. It's been over a decade since it's been in place. We review legislation consistently to make sure that it's timely, that it's up to date, that it deals with different things in the House. Why is this government so frightened to actually partake in a cross-party audit? If you want to, make it independent then. But what is the problem? What's so scary for the national government that it doesn't want to review that piece of legislation? And I think, sir, before I finish my contribution, it is worthy of note that our Crown debt is now $59.9 billion. It is worthy to note that it's doubled since 2010. And this government talks again and again and again about it's somebody else's fault, it's circumstances' fault, or it's the pig's fault, or it's Greece's fault, or Spain's fault, or somebody else's fault. But at the end of the day, it's their watch. At the end of the day, this is their debt, their watch. But the New Zealand taxpayer ends up having to pay for it over time. So while there's a hope and a prayer that we get into surplus, there's nothing in here that gives New Zealand First confidence that this government actually knows what it's doing.
Alistair Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity to talk on